Greetings, I am Brother Judah from the Congregation of Israel, a representative of the NMP, the Nazarene Messianic Party. I am your host today here at What Is to Be Done podcast. We investigate geopolitical, historical, biblical, social, and other scientific content. And we approach the Bible from a socio-political perspective. And we argue this is the appropriate way to approach the Bible because the Bible deals with kingdoms, nations, civilizations, empires, governments, societies, in short, political science and politics. Today I want to have a discussion on slavery, global entrepreneurship, and capitalism. Slavery, global entrepreneurship, and capitalism. That is the chorus of the day. Business, business, and business. That isn't foreign to the development or the growth of early societies. This business idea have been going on for some time. In the biblical passages, the development of, you can say, the roots of business was founded with Cain. The biblical narrative, or at least the oral tradition of the Hebrews or the Jewish people, argue that Cain was the father of weights and measures. He is also the one, according to Josephus, who argues that Cain is the author of weights and measures, and he was also, Cain that is, he was the one that introduced a new way of living that was different from the old societies of equity. Josephus called it peaceable. Cain's inventions disrupted the peaceable societies. The biblical narrative argued Cain brought in, or was the first one to make us or found a city. And then he introduced borders and weights and measures, in which the historian Josephus argues it was strange. When we're looking at entrepreneurship, we also find that the biblical authors made reference to the Canaanites, the enemies of the Israelite experiment, the Canaanites. They were known as merchants. And so let's, in fact, I want to show you, to tie this in, because what we're dealing with today upon the globe, and the toilers and the workers and the people trying to survive, this is a struggle that has been going on for a long time. But yet it is a struggle that the Bible says that the believer will win. So if we go to the Canaanite, these city-states that lived, the feudal city-states that lived along the Gaza Strip and the Levant, the Hivites, the Jebusites, Girgashites, Amorites, Perizzites, and thus and such. They were under the hegemony of Imperial Egypt. However, they still practice a certain amount of autonomy. But all of them were feudal city states. Now, these feudal city states survived, as all feudal states, primitive capitalism, and more developed so called capitalism, industrial techno capitalism. It all survives off the exploitation of labor. So I want you to understand that, you may read the Bible, and if it's not taught to you, the social political perspective, you might not make the political connections with the biblical characters and its narrative. For example, the Canaanite. The Canaanite is synonymous with a trafficker. And so this is what we have here, International Standard Bible Encyclopedia Online. The Canaanite, a trafficker. Canaan. As the Canaanites are celebrated merchants, came to mean merchant and so traffic. So the Canaanites were synonymous with merchants. The Babylonians were also merchants, synonymous with merchants. Mercantilism carried on a strange type of ideology in a development in which the Greeks called chrematistics. Now, again, chrematistics, which is synonymous with capital or capitalism, is comes from crema, money, a branch of political economy relating to the manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary value to the owner. So chrematistics is the art of acquisition, the art of money making. So the Canaanites practiced chrematistics. Slavery, global entrepreneurship, and capitalism are all cut out of that cloth. They're all cut out of that cloth. And it is the idea of slavery and entrepreneurship, and people say, well, we don't have slaves any longer. Yeah, you do, actually. Oh, and that's just a fact. But the argument is that this is the best for human beings, this system. And the people who chorus it, who sing all of that in chorus, how great entrepreneurship, capitalism, these are the same ones who are either exploiters or desire to be exploiters of other humans. In essence, biblically speaking, they will be identified with a Canaanite. They will be Canaanites. And the Canaanites practice the art of money making, which is chrematistics, which is distinctly different from economics. Economics is to satisfy a genuine need. This is to produce for the needs of the persons and the household management, not for profit. It's important for us to understand that. Now, this art of money making, or this part of political economy that relates to the manipulation, of property and wealth for short-term monetary gain or value, They are also identified as mammonist. I'm bringing mammonist up because in the Bible you read the word mammon. Mammon is material wealth. Crematistics is to have acquisition of this wealth. It is to increase this wealth. So you see mammon, according to Merriam-Webster, mammon, material wealth or possessions, especially as having a debasing influence. Well, that is what we have in crematistics, the art of money making, the art of money making. Now, this is the art of mammonism. And this is what the historical Jesus of Nazareth said about mammon. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Okay? Can't do both. And again, when we're looking at mammon, not from economia or economic, where economics come from, economia, which is the management of the household. That's where economics come from. Economia, the management of the household. Real economy embedded in real world. Focus on concrete and limited use of money. It is used, the wealth of whatever it may be, cattle and coinage, whatever it may be, is used for the household to benefit the household, aka the society. Crematistics, on the other hand, the manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary exchange for the owner. So Aristotle saw the goal of crematistics, unlimited accumulation, as unnatural, debasing. Well, this is what the Canaanite saw. Accumulation, unlimited. This is what empires seek. And this is the foundations of why we have slavery and this global entrepreneurship is a competition in capitalism, in mammonism, in the art of crematistics to acquire and accumulate and manipulate property and wealth. And it's important for us to recognize this because when it comes down to slavery, for example, it has this racial tone. They want you to think of racism, white versus black. That's a distortion of the facts. It's the working class versus the plundering property class. Now, if we go into the Hebrews, now Jesus argued you can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve God and mammon. What is the depth of that? Crematistics. What is the depth? Think about, you can't serve God and mammon or material wealth or possessions. How do you serve material wealth or possessions? Well, it's your service in obtaining them and accumulating them. Okay? That's what it is. Now, let's put this together. You can't serve it. You can't serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or else you will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, let's put this to the test. Let's go into the judicial rulings of slavery in the Hebrew Bible, in their constitution, the book of Exodus. Let's start there. The book of Exodus, chapter 21. And once we get to chapter 21, I will start reading at verse 16. And he that steals a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. So the judicial ruling of slave traffickers is the death sentence. I know people say, well, the Bible endorsed slavery. No, it don't. It describes slavery in a society in which it was developing. But if you don't understand the development of that society, then you're lost. And most people are lost when it comes down to the Bible and its description of slavery. And it's hard for them to reconcile things like this. Well, you can't steal a man. And then you may read texts of the Nakor, or the stranger, or the foreigner that was allowed to be put into perpetual servitude. That foreigner was allowed to be put in perpetual servitude, let's say if they went to war. And the part in which people miss is that if that foreigner decides to be a citizen of the 12 tribal confederacy, then those sanctions against him is removed. This is taught in the Talmud. This is taught in the literature of the sages. It's a sanction. And if you don't know about Israel's society, you think, oh, well, what if they don't want to be a part of this society? That's a good question. But even a better question is, why wouldn't the individual want to be a part of a society that seeks the well-being and equitable treatment of all, the abolition of classes, the abolition of exploitation, a society of free producers, a society in which there is equality among all men and genders? The question would be, who wouldn't want to be a part of a society like that? And then you will find out the Canaanite. Why? Because one want to serve mammon. They want to steal men. Bible says you can't steal men. Can't return them either. Look at this text. We want to go to another text, still in the legislation. Now, we most high willing, we're going to just deal more with the so-called apparent endorsement of slavery by the Bible, which is totally false. But even to enable to understand it, you have to understand, or it will be helpful to understand Israel's trajectory, its purpose, its mission. And Israel isn't a race. We were taught that a long time ago, probably because of the racial overtone of this society. Everything is built on race. But Israel is actually a national identity. That's why the stranger who came out of Egypt with the children of Jacob or the children of Israel, if you were strangers, you took on that national identity. And this is expounded more in our teaching Born Again, from a foreign slave to a natural born son. This gets into the political background and undergirding of the entire Israelite concept of born again, and how this adoption of this society that is built and exercise equity and justice will lead to salvation. So, most high willing, we will discuss it. But right now, I want us to go to Deuteronomy 23 in the legislation of the Hebrew people, the Jewish people. Deuteronomy 23. And when we get to Deuteronomy 23, I'll start at verse 15. Deuteronomy 23 and verse 15. And notice what we find. You shall not hand over to his master a slave that has escaped from his master to you. He shall live with you, among you, in the place which he chooses inside one of your gates. Whatever it is pleasing to him, you shall not oppress him. So this, again, if you understand the Confederacy and those who want to become citizens of the Confederacy, they become a part of that national identity. See, you can't necessarily look at Israel as a race, even though, again, if you're taught that when you read the Bible, you're going to project these ideas. But Esau and Jacob have the same father and mother. So theoretically and concretely, according to race doctrine, they're of the same race. And people misunderstand where it says, well, there's two manner of nations in your womb. That's why they fighting against each other. This is what was told Isaac's wife, Rebecca. Well, yes, two manner of nations, not races. They have two different they will develop two different national identities. Okay? So, if you became a part of the Yahweh's national identity, then all sanctions were released from you. If you sought the Yahwehist or the Yahweh society, fleeing from your own country, then you was to find refuge. And so there is a context to this description that the Bible is giving to servitude. It has its own context and narrative and theme. And for you to understand it, don't enforce your ideas on the text. Read the text, gather its data, and learn its narrative and theme. So there's crimes, and that didn't stop. So if we go to Timothy, one of the Torah teachers, the Apostle Saul or Shaul, he wrote a letter to Timothy, and his letter will be reminiscent of what is written in the National Code of Law, the Israelite National Code of Law. The 12 Tribal Confederacy had a federal government, and this confederacy had its own constitution with codes of law. And it is relevant to this day. And it will reign supreme. Its code of law, its constitution, thus is signified by the kingdom of God and God's will being established on this earth, as is said in the Lord's Prayer. But if we get to our text in 1 Timothy, 1 Timothy, starting at verse 6, from which having, no, let me skip down a little bit. 9. Verse 9. And we know that the law is good if anyone uses it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not laid down for a righteous one, but for the lawless and unruly ones, for ungodly and sinful ones, for unholy and profane ones. Who are they? The slayers of fathers and slayers of mothers, for murderers, for fornicators, for homosexuals, for slave traders, for liars, for perjured persons, or for perjurers, and if any other thing opposes sound teaching. So one of the activities of the sinful ones, the profane ones, the unrighteous ones, are those slave traders. Slave traders. See, so much for the rich tampering with the Bible. Why if you're gonna tamper with the Bible, you would remove things in there that condemn you. But they didn't tamper with it. And that's another discussion. So that was Timothy that we read. 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. The slaver. He is a sinful one, a profane one. Okay? So when we're looking at this entrepreneurship, global entrepreneurship, what is it based on? Slavery. And people idea of slavery is only chattel slavery. No. It's more than that. Much more. So Merriam-Webster, for example, explains to us that slavery is the state of a person who is forced, usually under threat of violence, in parentheses I will add, or harm, to labor for the profit of another. How much violence is starvation, homelessness? You see, it was argued that a more effective way, according to many of the capitalists in Europe, and efficient, isn't to keep the laborer laboring for you by way of corporal punishments, beatings. They argue more efficient is and less and using less exertion is to just affect their bellies. So if you have all of the resources, if you don't work for me, you won't eat. You won't have shelter. You won't have clothing. You will be exposed to the elements. lack nutrition. That's violence. It's actually called social murder. Social murder. A topic that, God willing, we can discuss. So slavery is the state of a person who is forced, usually under threat of violence, to labor for the profit of another. But Merriam-Webster also adds that slavery is a situation or practice in which people are coerced to work under conditions that are exploitive. You're forced. You're forced by means of the means of production, and your resources and your necessities and your necessaries are sold to you. And if you don't have the monetary exchange to trade, then you will perish. You will suffer. And so under these conditions, people work under exploitation. And we got to follow up with that, because slavery is alive and well, not just in the so-called second and third world countries, but in the so-called first world countries and the developed countries also. As Karl Marx argued, is hidden. But slavery nonetheless. So let's look at the fabric of this slavery and this mammonism in which people serve. So will you gain mammon by stealing men? See, remember, Jesus said you can't serve God and mammon. So the institution of slavery was a service for profit, to make wealth. It was a service for profit to make wealth, just as we discussed before. We had looked over this before. It was a strange God who perched himself side by side with the old divinities of Europe on the altar. And one fine day threw them all overboard with a shove and a kick, and proclaimed the making of profit as the ultimate purpose of mankind. Profit. Now, this undergirding of slavery and entrepreneurship is the desire for wealth. If we examine or review again a text by Frank Chapman, Black Liberation and Socialism, he says, during the period of primitive accumulation of capital, slavery was crucial to the creation of world trade. Traffickers, like the Canaanites, the servers of mammon, those who practice chrematistics. Slavery was crucial to the creation of world trade. And this is what is projected to us to this day. It's that doctrine is shoved in our face as children, because capitalism as we know it can only stand by way of ignorance, and also to be educated with its ideology. You see, people say, well, socialism doesn't work. Again, you have to think this out. Any economic system will not work if the people are not taught about it. So it's not just a means of dividing property and equitable distribution of the goods. You have to teach people about it. The people have to see its benefits. But the capitalists have worked hard to hide these benefits and to exploit the mistakes and failures. But yet they cover the failures of capital. And slavery was when they really couldn't cover it up, so they cloak it with the veil of racism. No, this is a capitalist institution. This is a global trade that was carried on by the Canaanites of the world, the merchants and traffickers, the kings and rulers. So, but yet slavery was crucial to the creation of world trade, as we have pointed out above. But when the qualitative leap into industry capitalism became a fiat accompli slavery, the leap into industry capitalism became a fiat accompli slavery, or fiat accompli, excuse me. Slavery became a fetter to the further development of capitalism. The further development of it, as it was leaving primitive capitalism, its semi-feudal characteristic, into more advanced machinery and technology and industry. So the more advanced sections of the industrial capitalist class in England became the advocates of the abolition of slavery. And this is actually debated or mentioned in the Congress discussions and debates in the 1800s. So this is one feature. You did have English capitalists who wanted to end capitalism. Wanted to end slavery. And why? Because they wanted to end chattel slavery. And they were going to introduce a new form of service by means of exploitation. Dr. Horn, who wrote a text, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, he teaches us slavery fueled the rising capitalism. However, ironically, breaking the bonds of slavery was necessary if capitalism was to realize its full potential. So its transition from primitive capital to more industrial capital, it had to break the bonds of slavery. Even though slavery was the undergirding, it catapulted industrial capitalists and industrial capitalism. However, this slavery in which Frank Chapman and Dr. Gerald Horne is making reference to is antebellum slavery, chattel slavery, not slavery pure and simple. So the survival of capitalism was based off slavery. Antebellum slavery or chattel slavery catapulted capitalism into its higher phase. Not least since enslaved Africans were fiercely determined to destroy the wealth they were creating. So it was a few things going on. Dr. Horn is bringing out more how slavery wasn't really becoming profitable and economical for the slaveholder, for that entrepreneur. They were destroying wealth, killing cattle, sabotaging crops, running away. Okay? So, not least since enslaved Africans were fiercely determined to destroy the wealth they were creating, along with the lords of the lash. Contradictorily, slavery was both a boost to nascent capitalism and ultimately a fetter on its productive forces. That's Dr. Horn. So the entrepreneurs, the same entrepreneurs that started slavery were the money class. The new industry developed another type of master, which we're going to get into in another session as we look at some writings from Charles Vail and his text, Socialism and the Negro Problem. But as of now, let us look at what Stanley Elkins commented about slavery and the business of slavery. All right? The global entrepreneurship and capitalism. And so, how did slavery in the United States come into being? Now, this is Elkins' text, Slavery. That's the name of it, by Stanley Elkins. Page 37. The question was asked, how did slavery in the United States being? There was nothing natural about it. We found that in the debates of Congress on the slave question, we know that it came to the United States by the monarchies from Europe. Okay, so before the United States formed the United Confederacy of the Colonies, slavery was there being pushed by the monarchs of Europe and trading between the monarchs, the kingdoms in Africa, the kingdoms in Europe, and thus and such. Elkins argues, yet before reviewing in greater detail the legal aspects of the servitude, we should note that the vital facts about its inception, remain quite unaccounted for. Was it the motive of gain? Yes. That's it. Profits and gain, chromatistics. This was the motive behind it. This is the motive behind slavery today. And many of us don't realize the crimes being committed on a daily basis and refuse to serve the Creator. And to serve the Creator is much more than what traditional religion has taught. The Creator demands that the social experiment that was started by Moses and the 12 tribal confederacy, he demands that the people take up that banner and fill the world with that experiment. That's one of his commands. The children of Israel wandered in the wilderness because they broke the commandment. He didn't make them wander in the wilderness because some of them didn't keep the Sabbath day. He punished some. They was just getting the law code. They're wandering in the wilderness and walking in a circle. That judgment came when they refused the commandment to go take the land of Canaan. Why? Because the experiment of Abraham must be realized in the earth. What God promised Abraham must be realized in the earth. And for the sake of the record, it's in Genesis 18. Genesis 18 and verse 18. It reads, "And Abraham shall become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, so that whatever he may command his sons and his houses after him, even they may keep the way of Yahweh, to do righteousness and justice, to the instant that Yahweh may bring on Abraham that which he has spoken of him." So the children of Abraham must do righteousness or justice and judgment. That nation, that powerful nation, must bring righteousness and judgment. Abraham's seed and Yahweh's justice to the nations is a narrative of the biblical text that finds itself in the commandment of God. Abraham's children don't have a choice if you're going to be called Abraham's children. If you are called the children of Abraham, then you are commissioned to become a part of this mighty nation or powerful nation that shall bring forth justice and judgment. So to serve the Creator is to organize for this matter. You see, it isn't how religious people have taught you or taught us. And that's exactly what it took to fight against the primitive feudal institutions, people organizing to fight against the injustice. Abraham's children are supposed to organize these people, all people, into the national identity of Yahwism or Israel, which is a national identity, one who is the receptacle of God, because all who joins unto the house of Israel and become a part of that national identity, this is the receptacle in which God will dwell. Thus, he will make his abode on earth. And all are to join in that society and become one. And so this is what Abraham's children is called to do. This is what it means. This is this is the first and primary commandment in all the law and prophets, is the undergirding of justice and judgment. Or should I say it the other way around, that the children of Israel and their experiment, this national identity, their undergirding is this powerful nation that God will build, catapulting them to the world scene to renovate the earth. You see, once you understand this, then it could probably become it probably would make sense when Jesus said, "You be brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake." Why? Because you're going to collide against them, just like they collided against the kings and rulers to end antebellum slavery or chattel slavery. In the 1840s, 1850s, if you was in the field waiting for a chariot to come out of the clouds, looking in that hot sun down there somewhere in Louisiana or Texas or Mississippi or Alabama, and you out there picking cotton or whatever it is, and you just keep looking up in the sky in that hot sun waiting for some chariot to come out of the sky, you didn't make it nowhere. But for the ones who boarded the chariots of God, and they allow themselves to be the vessels of the power and yielded themselves to fight for justice and humane rights, that is where the salvation of the Creator was found. That is where it will be found today. But if your motive is gain, you can't do that. That's what Yeshua ben David was saying. You can't serve mammon and God. You can't serve wealth, or else you will not return the slave. See, once you serve mammon, you got to keep that slave. Once you serve mammon, you have to keep exploiting. God telling you not to. And so therefore there's a dilemma. a dilemma. So was the motive gain? Yes, absolutely. In the emergent agricultural capitalism of colonial Virginia, we may already make out a mode of economic organization which was taking on a purity of form never yet seen, and the difference lay in the fact that here a growing system of large-scale staple production for profit was free to develop. Here's the growth of industrial capital. What was the motive? Mammon. The ideology of the Canaanite prevailed. The trafficker. That's who prevailed. The trafficker. So when you read in your Bible, you read about the Canaanite, we're talking about the trafficker. As the Canaanites were celebrated merchants, Canaan came to mean merchant, and so traffic. It's the Canaanites who promoted slavery. Let's go further and see what Elkins was saying about, we find first it was this profit motive, correct? And then Elkins continues, in a society where no prior traditional institutions with competing claims of their own might interpose at any of a dozen points with sufficient power to retard or modify its progress, what happens when such energy meets no limits? Here, even in its embryonic stages, it is possible to see the process whereby capitalism would emerge as the principal dynamic force in American history or American society. It was thus in a period of relatively hard times that it became clear, if the colony of Virginia were to prosper, that capitalism would be the dynamic force in its economic life. And that's when we were discussing Senator Phelps and the debates in Congress. And these debates were teaching or informing us that the framers of the Constitution and all of the slavers understood slavery to be an inexorable necessity. They couldn't get rid of it. Why? Because if the colonies are to survive, capitalism would have to be the force of its economic life. And if capitalism is to survive, or capitalism have to come into being, we need slavery. Or capitalism, industrial capitalism as they knew it. They needed slavery. So when we're looking at slavery, we're talking about entrepreneurship, capitalism. This is racism is a distraction. All right? Was the black slave owner who owned slaves racist? The black slave owner who owned black slave, he a racist? Was the black maroons who crushed slave revolts and returned slaves back to their owners, were these black maroons racist? Or did they work in behalf of a certain class? See, today we are enslaved to the capitalist class. We can choose to sell ourselves to any master, usually, if they can examine us and find us fit for profit, many of us. But you're not free from that class. And that capitalist class creates a situation or a practice in which people are coerced to work under conditions that are exploitive. So, in a society of the colonies, they needed to prosper, to survive, and slavery and capitalism was the catalyst for that. The man who managed it, still in Elkins, his text entitled Slavery, the man who managed it would be the man with the large holdings, or man with property and means. The man who could command a substantial force of laborers, this type of entrepreneur, white or black, who could afford a sizable yearly investment in the handling of his crop. In short, the capitalist planter. It was the man of means who could afford to link, it was the man of means who can afford to think in this way. But then he is one who most concerns us, the man responsible for Negro slavery. Who? The man of means, the capitalist planter. That's why the majority of slavers in the West were white. But they were not the only slavers. Black slavers, indigenous slavers. So it wasn't a white man's institution. It was a capitalist institution. The capitalists did it. And we have to understand that this is an economic institution of exploitation. The majority of slave owners in the West was white, but the majority of white people did not own slaves. Because in order to be a capitalist planter, you had to have large holdings, or else your business will go under. And there are records of people losing their plantations because their businesses went under. The man who can afford this is a man who can afford a sizable yearly investment in the handling of his crops. The only one who could afford to think this way is the capitalist planter or the entrepreneur, the global entrepreneur. The Canaanites of capital and chromatistics. This is an evil. This is a crime in which the Bible teaches against. And that's why in the religions of the world, it's not talked about. But when you read the Bible, it is one of the narratives expressed. And the theme of its destruction is to create heaven, to destroy this economic exploitive system. Now, this is what Elkins had to say about it. Now, I want to go to Black Reconstruction before we close. W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, Du Bois, he's going to speak here about slavery and the slave as a worker. The labor movement in England. In fact, we're going to look at the global influence. The labor movement in England continued to emphasize the importance of attacking slavery. Now, this isn't the capitalists in England. These are the workers in Europe. Even though attacking slavery will cause them to lose work and factories to lay off, Our brothers and sisters in Europe still fought against it. Now, this isn't the capitalists in England who wanted to end slavery for the next phase of capitalist development. These are the workers. Same white workers who reached out to Frederick Douglass, for example. The same white workers who helped hand in hand in the movement of the Underground Railroad. The labor movement in England continued to emphasize the importance of attacking slavery, and the agitation started by the work of Frederick Douglass and others increased in importance and activity. In 1857, George I Holyoake sent an anti-slavery address to America, signed by 1,800 English workmen, whom Karl Marx himself was guiding in England. And this made the Black American worker a central text. They pointed out the fact that the black worker was furnishing the raw material which the English capitalist was exploiting together with the English worker. This same year, the United States Supreme Court sent down the Dred Scott decision that Negroes were not citizens. This was all a part of the battle. It wasn't too long before the institution was crushed as we know it, chattel slavery. But the war still goes on. We have our white brothers and sisters in Europe. Karl Marx, who was one of the leaders of over 1,000 English working men who were advocating the abolition of slavery. And we're learning that the black worker was part and parcel in furnishing the raw materials for the English capitalists, who in turn exploited the English worker. So when we're looking at the English worker, this is the veiled slavery that Marx talked about. But this is the activities of the global entrepreneur. So we're looking at slavery, global entrepreneurship, and capitalism. Let's understand the science behind it so we can understand that our true enemies aren't racial groups. It's political systems. Political systems. Du Bois continues, it has been estimated that the southern states had in 1863 $1 billion invested in slaves, which meant that slaves and land represented the mass of their capital or their mammon. Why? Because this is chrematistics. That's what we're looking at. Chrematistics, the chrematistics of slavery. You can't serve two masters. Either you are advocate for justice with the abolition of slavery, which is a crime against humanity. This is what it means to serve the Creator. Or you're an advocate for wealth, right? You are an advocate for mammon, which is material wealth. Jesus said you can't serve both. So in order for all of these rich men to go sit in their churches, in their Protestant churches or their Catholic churches, you know they can't have the Bible read to them. They don't even really know what it say, let alone changed it. It's the job of the servant of God to make known unto the world the manifold wisdom of God. But that's what we have here, this, this chrematistics idea. The manipulation of property and wealth so as to maximize short-term monetary exchange. This unnatural accumulation or acquisition of wealth. This art of money making was found in the slave institution, and it is still found in the slave institution. We got $1863 billion invested in slaves which meant that slaves and land represented the mass of their capital. The argument went like this: raw material like cotton, tobacco, sugar, rice, together with other foodstuffs, formed the real wealth of the United States and were produced by the southern states. These crops were sold all over the world and were in such demand that the industry of Europe depended upon them. That's why in the Congress debates of 1850, they said it was an inexorable necessity. So you could not end slavery because, according to the modern economic or commercial merchant civilization, it will collapse if you was to end slavery. And the blows against slavery, against antebellum slavery, sent ripple effects throughout the globe. But it must be taken down, and it will be taken down. But one of the greatest schemes have been run on and pawned off on people is for them to believe and not understand what it means to be a slave. And if you don't know what freedom is and what it entails, then you will probably never question your servitude. But it is the truth that makes us free. Let us look at another one with Du Bois. He said, but there was another motive which more and more strongly, as time went on, compelled the planter to cling to slavery. What is that? His political power was based on slavery. With 4 million slaves, he could balance the votes of 2 million Northern voters, or 2,400,000 to be exact, Northern voters. While in the inconceivable event of their becoming free, their votes will outnumber those of his Northern opponents, which was precisely what happened in 1868. As the economic power of the planter waned, his political power became more and more indispensable to the maintenance of his income and profits. Holding his industrial system secure by this political domination, the planter, or the Canaanite, or the entrepreneur turned to the more systematic exploitation of his black labor. One method called for more land and the other for more slaves. Both meant not only increased crops, but increased political power. And that's how it is today. You keep your slave ignorant, the corrupt entrepreneur and capitalist stay in political power. But once the slave is enlightened and break his chains, then those who sit in political power are to be removed. And the founding fathers of this country have laid out the groundwork and paved the way to remove such hostility without even a cannon or a gun or anything. Just organization and discipline. The superior weaponry for liberation. See, it's probably easy to pull a trigger. It's more involved to build your intellect. But the building of the intellect formed a certain man, the one who could pull a trigger, stay as he is. You see, you can get the most brutish of men to use carnal weapons and instruments of war that are carnal, but the intellectual warrior reigns far supreme, and his training is superior, and his training takes more discipline. But this is the type that will furnish the Abrahamic block, that will furnish the powerful nation of Abraham. It's this type of man and woman that will be the vanguard to liberate the world and to remove the mighty out of their seats and to sit in seats of power, administering the just policies of the kingdom of God in health and welfare and distribution of goods and housing and clothing and food, nutrition, and enjoying the pleasures of the creation. But if you're not made aware of these things, they just simply doesn't seem to exist. So our job as educators is very important. So we find what is inextricably tied together: political power and slavery, as it is today. One method called for more land and the other for more slaves. Both meant not only increased crops, but increased political power. And this led to this confrontation of the North and the South. All right. But the war isn't over. It's still work to be done. And now, as it was then, is the call and the time for those real servants of God who seek to be not just called, but chosen. It's time for the real ones to stand up. Put on your armor. Make it to the battlefield. For the front line of the battle is hot. And our duty is calling. I thank you for your time, for tuning in with us today. I am Brother Judah, your host, here on What Is to Be Done podcast. And most high willing, we will return with more discussions and more topics. And we're going to close with our session today: slavery, global entrepreneurship, and capitalism. The capitalist merchant hunt for human flesh and labor power for his increasing of his wealth and political power. So all of you who are sincerely searching, we say peace and blessings to you. And everyone who has an ear to hear, let them hear.